we have another caller, Andrew from Maine. He doesn't like that we don't think that anything has inherent value. So, Andrew, you are live on Truth Wanted.
Hi. Yeah, you just read my point. I just think that's a very dangerous belief and can be used to justify some horrific things. And I just wanted to point that out, that thinking that inherent value there is none is a bad thing. So that's my point.
So what do you think the value, how do you justify that there is inherent value to anything? I presume you're talking about to a human.
Yeah, or anything, but mostly humans, yeah. I'm a Christian, so I take a Christian approach to that. So that's where I believe inherent value comes from. Yeah.
I mean, that's reasonable. I mean, if we were to agree with your presupposition that God exists, then things would have a value independent of people observing one another, because there would always be an observer. But like, if we don't agree on that,
But hang on, would that be inherent value? Or would that be would that be God saying that God values human life?
No, it would be God creating humans with inherent value. I mean, the source is God. I mean, if you want to draw it back to there, but I mean, the real point, that the first thing that comes to my mind when you say nothing has inherent value, I think that can be used to justify things like genocide, and I think that's horrific. So I just think it's a terrible position, and I wanted to point that out.
Why does something have to have inherent value to have value?
Because if value is only ascribed by people, then, I mean, if you have someone in power who doesn't value a certain race or whatever, they snap their fingers, say, go kill all those people. It's my decision. I ascribe value. I think that's horrific. And if you don't have inherent value, you can ultimately get to that place. So that's why I think that.
All right, Andrew, but the problem here is that we're missing a step, right? The just because something would have terrible implications if it were true doesn't mean it's not true, right? Like, if obviously we disagree on this point, but if we're saying, oh no, that life has no value because there's no afterlife, wouldn't that be terrible? That doesn't mean there's an afterlife. It just means that that's terrible. We're not even at the point.
I wasn't trying to argue that. I mean, obviously, I believe that's true. I wasn't trying to convince you that it's true. I was trying to say that your belief is extremely dangerous. That's my main point. So that's what, and it sounds like you're agreeing with me.
Well, I mean, I think it's dangerous. I think it depends on how that person assigns value, right? Just because I don't think that anything has inherent value doesn't mean that I don't think something has value. And again, if we're contrasting it with your position, you don't actually believe that humans have inherent value either. Their value comes from God's value of human life, right? If God chose to not value human life, then human life wouldn't be inherently valuable, right?
Yes, that's right. I mean, yes, you can draw it back to God as the source. But I mean, I still don't think that defeats my point, that, because I mean, you say, just because it's not just about what you ascribe value to, right? I'm saying if people can get in power who value whatever they want, and, and there's nothing to say that your value ascriptions are more valid than anyone else's. So I just think it's really dangerous.
Right. Well, that's why we try to be humanistic in terms of our moral philosophy, or at least I do, to a certain extent. Although that's not, that doesn't mean that I ascribe inherent value to humans, right? But we try to take into consideration the feelings of things that can feel things, if that makes sense. And try to, like, my maxim is to try to reduce suffering. And sometimes that means valuing a life, and sometimes that doesn't mean valuing a life, and sometimes that means, doing something else. Like, I can think of a lot of people who have maybe a horrible disease that they're slowly dying from, and they would prefer a quick, painless death under their control. And you might look at that and say that we're not valuing that person's life. Would you agree with that, Andrew?
Well, no, I would. Well, so when you say, I would say, when you say you want to reduce suffering, it sounds to me, suffering is experienced by the person, so you value their experience. So it sounds like you do inherently value people and their experiences. I think those two things are linked. So, yeah.
You're saying inherent again, like it's he values it. It's not innate, right? It's in pursuit of reduction of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean it's his basic
and it's arbitrary.
I think okay. So if it's arbitrary, then how could you ever be justified in saying one thing is more preferable to another? I mean, it's just totally arbitrary, so it doesn't matter.
Well, so it's arbitrary because I decide that I want to value this, and I don't see any. So, like, I am also a scientist, and I study the world, and I've never seen any evidence to tell us that we should value human life, particularly, or even like life particularly, right? Like, who is to say that the solar system that we live in is more valuable than the next solar system over that maybe has no life on it? There's nothing in the natural world that tells us that, right?
I've never seen a bottle of value.
In that case, would you want to reduce suffering then? That doesn't make sense to me. If you have no, why do you want to reduce suffering if you have no scientific basis to value life?
Right. Well, because you can't get from an is to an ought, right? I can make scientific determinations all day, but it doesn't tell me what I should do. And the ought is ultimately arbitrary, right? And you choose to put it in, you sort of arbitrarily, air quotes, arbitrarily put it in, the decision of like a god. So you sort of like offload the responsibility of making that decision to a higher power, whereas we don't, and we have to make those decisions ourselves,
from within and from without, a part of society and a part of ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you just admitted that it's all arbitrary. So, I mean, you would really have no justification in making any sort of ought statements then.
Well, the foundation is arbitrary, but then the foundation is arbitrary, but then the what follows along is not, right? It all corresponds back to your original foundation,
and not everything
just like
arbitrary.
The rules of
why is that? I don't see how if the foundation is arbitrary, the rest is not. I don't see that.
So the rules of a game are arbitrary, right? But you can.
Yes.
I've never gotten checkmate in Monopoly.
Right. But you can still make determinations about what you should do to win that game based on the rules, which are arbitrary. And those are all reasonable and substantiated based on the arbitrary rules that are set.
Yeah, but why? I mean, if you didn't like the rules because you think they're arbitrary, you have no reason to just not switch them and do whatever you want. So I mean,
well, except that then nobody would play with me if I was constantly changing the rules, and I would not do well.
I mean, why?
And so I think so. So the analogy then would be, if I want to live in a society with other people, my foundation better be something that everyone gets along with and everyone can agree to.
Okay, so really, I mean, it's just you go with whatever the society prefers, I guess. That's what it is.
Well, I think that a lot of our ethics are evolutionary, and I think that the trend throughout history has been we're gradually increasing our circle of empathy and who we consider to be our in-group and who we sort of ascribe value to as a society. And I think that we need to continue doing that.
But why do you value empathy, and why do we need to continue doing that? What is it all just so you can, is it all just survival? Is that what it boils down to? Or
survival of an individual and survival of the species. I mean, in
Yeah.
some ways, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Not all things that are arbitrary are equal, right? They're arbitrary in so much as like from like an is standpoint, right? We can't like point to a bottle of our intention or our values or whatever we do, but when we but we do live in certain circumstances which make us more likely to be, you know, value one thing over another, or set up a value system in one way or another. So you're saying it's we might as well just come up with whatever system? No, the we sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say
done.
we're not just as likely to come up with a system that's cruel as we are to come up with a system that is empathetic, because that's just not our nature.
I mean, okay, so I mean, you're just going. I mean, maybe it's not yours, but I mean, you don't. I guess you really have no justification for valuing empathy or anything. It's just, again, it's just whatever I pick out of the hat. It's what I want. So if there's someone else with a conflicting view of I want to crush your society, but their view is arbitrary, I mean, they're just as justified in doing that, I think, right?
Well, so that's part of the problem with like looking at things through a historical lens, right? So we look back and we think, oh, well, they didn't value this person, and that's why they, enslaved, murdered, whatever, those people. And so we always judge things from a modern lens, and our ethics are continually, I would say, improving. But again, that's sort of an arbitrary determination, right? But I mean, fundamentally, I think I kind of I get what you're saying, and you're kind of right. But like, we have to do the best we can, right? It's like, again, it's just like science, right? We don't have all the answers right now, but we got to work with what we've got, and we got to make decisions based on the information we have, right?
We can't pretend we have more than we do.
I don't think.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think you can say it's just like science, because you said yourself that you can't get from an is to an ought. So it's really not.
No, I know
at all.
I'm drawing an analogy in that we are improving, and yes, we don't have an absolute foundation, like an objective foundation, but there is no objective foundation. Like, even if you're appealing to a god, it's not an objective foundation, right? It's still arbitrary.
I mean, I wouldn't say that. I would say whatever God, the word of God. I mean, so I disagree with that from a Christian standpoint. But I mean, what if there was another group of people with a totally different morality from you? There's no way for you to. It's just tribalism at that point. There's no way for you to say, oh, mine is better. So it's just tribalism. That's what it is.
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on which God too, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, you're right. There's nothing in the universe that tells us fundamentally that A is better than B. It's all with respect to a goal, and the goal is always arbitrary, because there's nothing to tell us what the goal should be.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's your view. I mean, that's not mine, but yes, I mean, I agree that we agree about your view, and I just wanted to point out how, from my perspective, and probably many people's, that can lead to very scary things. That's all I wanted to say. So, I mean, it's just kind of terrifying if you actually follow that logic. So,
to be fair, the some of the scarier things have actually come from people who follow your belief system, right? Some of the scary things that have happened historically have happened because someone was convinced that their God told them to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I would
told them that only the Israelites were God's chosen people, right? And so the Israelites' lives were more valuable. Or, hey, doesn't it say in the Bible that men's lives are more valuable than women's? Men's lives are worth like 5 shekels and women's are worth 3, or some multiple of that?
I'm not aware of that. I don't think that one is justifiable from the Bible. But yeah, I mean, again, obviously I would probably say a lot of those people were mistaken, but at the end of the day, I guess it's just tribalism. And
it just depends which
I don't know.
Which tribe you're a part of,
Yeah.
Which Bible you're following, which religion, which denomination. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously there are many different. Yeah, no, I get that. But I mean, I know I can't really convince you my way is better either. But I'm glad that we can at least agree that your way is arbitrary. So
Just as much
I
as
guess
yours.
that's so. Also, that kind of like when you acknowledge that, anytime someone acknowledges that, and then I hear like moral indignation from them, I'm just kind of like, this is kind of stupid because, as you say, it's really all arbitrary. So you're really
Well, only if you agree with our position, right? Do you not agree that we should be reducing suffering?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, the basis is different. I mean, but I agree with that. Yeah. So,
Okay. So then if I express
don't know.
moral indignation that someone is doing something that increases suffering, why would you not agree with that?
Well, I would.
Why would you not agree with my indignation?
Because I think either it's just performative or you're not actually being intellectually honest, because you have to acknowledge that it's just arbitrary. And if some other group wanted to increase suffering because that was what they valued, then they're just as justified in doing that. So that's why.
Why is it intellectually dishonest to have ethics that are not founded on something objective?
Why is it because I'm not saying it's. I'm saying considering your ethics better than someone else's is dishonest. That's what I'm saying, because there's the same foundation for both. So that's why.
Well, so I think that in a lot of cases, if you boiled these questions down, these disagreements, these moral disagreements down, you would either get to, number one, people have different goals, so they have different like fundamental values, or in which case it's like, as you say, I think this is better and they think this is better, and we have a fundamental disagreement. Or you agree on the common goal and one of the two people is doing it wrong, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know what you mean by wrong, but I mean, I get what you're saying, the general point, yeah. So I'm not sure where you're going with that, but I still think, there's no justification for thinking one belief is better than another. So,
Well, again, like you're loading the question with the word better. Better implies a benchmark that you're measuring against, and you can only measure with the benchmark that you have. I don't know what you would expect. Like how do you justify your position being superior to ours, for example?
I mean, I think it comes from a divine source, and I know that.
How do you know what the divine source says or thinks?
I mean, I'm a Christian, so I mean, you can. It's the Bible. I mean, interpretation, culture, context. I mean, we probably don't need to go down this road, but if you just generally think about what you know about Christians, that's what I believe. So,
I know a lot of genocides came from Christians.
I mean, I would say those were not real Christians. I mean, there's nothing. I don't. So, but I mean, that's kind of beside the point. I mean, I'm not trying to compare history here. I'm talking about the philosophical underpinnings of the positions. So, I acknowledge.
Well, philosophically, you've arbitrarily chosen to believe something, believe in a Christianity, we'll say, and you think that that's superior, but you don't have any actual evidence, any actual basis to think that that's a superior moral system, do you?
What do you mean by evidence? I mean,
what makes Christianity real versus atheism? Why should I believe in Christianity?
Why should you believe in Christianity versus not believing in God? Is that what you're saying? Like God versus God? Is that what you're? Well, I mean, if you're just talking about God in general, then I mean, there's lots of arguments for that. the infinite regression of causes. There has to be a first cause. There's one I just actually learned about today, which I don't even want to get into because it's kind of complicated. But I mean, there's lots of philosophical arguments. You can't find I don't know. I mean, evolution is not. It's
You're jumping around a lot.
If you dig down, I know, because you're asking me a very broad question. That's why I'm jumping around. So
if you ask me to support gravity, I don't have to jump around to philosophy and reductions and all that.
Okay, so that's another one. Is a lot of people point to the fine tuning. I mean, there's like a lot of constants in physics that if they were a tiny degree off, then there wouldn't be life as we know it. So that's another one. You bring up gravity. That's another example. So
I bet in all the universes where people don't have those just right, they're wondering why theirs weren't quite as good. Except you don't have any evidence that other universes exist. So I mean, so that's an irrelevant. I think you might have missed the
speculation.
point. I think you might have missed the point. We would only observe it if it was right. That's all I'm saying. I think we're just getting in.
And I'm saying I'm saying mathematically, the chances of all of them of us being here, it's really small. So I mean, yes, it could. I mean, it's like, well, maybe I guess there was a dice roll and it happened, but I don't believe that. I mean, I think it might take even more faith to believe that it's all random. So we're diving into other topics, but I mean, I'm just going to answer whatever questions you ask me. So.
All right. So I think we've agreed that we both think each other's positions are arbitrary, and I'm okay with my position being arbitrary.
Yeah.
Are you okay with yours being arbitrary?
I mean, I don't believe mine is arbitrary. I don't think I agree that. I think I totally understand why you think that. But okay. I think moral indignation, that's never justified from you. And so, yeah, I wanted to point that out as well. But.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for your call, Andrew. We appreciate the conversation. I don't know. I don't think we could have come to any resolution there.
Yeah, I mean, really, the only way we could have done that was to agree on whether or not there's a God, and I feel like that's kind of a difficult one to solve in one call. But
yeah,
I think we saw the path there. I don't know how we get from a position where we're saying we're having a morally rough position because we are applying modern ethics, the world standard basically of ethics, versus something that has a very, very long track record and history of genocide and all these sorts of things. Like, if he wants to bring it there, we can go to blows on that. But if he's going to invoke genocide, I mean, you got to have a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
You can't stand on all those bodies and say that, if your moral high ground is standing on a pile of bodies, you think you might need to rethink your high ground.
Fantastic. Okay.